Welcome to Daybreak TV. Here we bring you stories of lives changed inside correctional institutions because of Jesus Christ. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe and hit the like button below. Today we are talking with Hank Dixon from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Hank was an addict, committed murder at the age of 19, and was given a life sentence. Hank became a federal chaplain, then a regional chaplain, earned a doctorate degree, and now is teaching at Providence University in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We want to thank each one for joining us on Daybreak TV, and the purpose of putting this program together is to bring chaplains, bring ex-offenders, bring parole officers, bring probation officers, bring people in the community, and bring the family members of people that are doing time so they get to share their story of how prison life affects the individual that's inside doing time, how they've adjusted when they got to the street, and the support that's out on the street, so that you know that you're not just doing time, but you're coming out on some period of time that you're going to get on the street, and you're going to need support, either from 12-step programs or a church that you can fit into, that you're going to hopefully be accepted in and be relaxed in coming in to worship in that center. So today, I have a friend that we go back at least to the 90s. Could you, Hank, you were at Renews at the time. I think you came down with Gordon. And so Hank Dixon has a very unique story. And I'll get into it very quickly with him. But he's come a long ways from where he was as a 19-year-old addict. There was things that brought him into that position of being a 19-year-old addict. The trouble that he got into and what it presented and brought into his life. So Hank, I thank you for joining us this afternoon. And as we get your story, again, for what you've been through, because I read your book, and there was a gentleman that helped us put this program together, and he was up in the Kingston area, Brian Judge, and Jimmy Cavanaugh. I don't know if you know Jimmy or not. Yeah. He was
I know Jimmy,
did time and yeah. So yeah. I was, every time I go through Kingston, any guys that I've worked with, Jimmy is still around, and his wife Shirley, and I stop in and I asked Jimmy, I said, I'm going to be going to see Brian Judge in right after I was done having coffee with them. And I said, how is he? And they said, you know, he's a good guy. And so he had prison ministry background in Joyceville, doing some TV work. And when we had our conversation, this is June of 2018, and he's the one, we came out of Tim Hortons, the regular community gathering place, and he said, did you see the TV on the wall? And I said, yeah. He said, that's Tim Hortons TV. And I said, okay. And he said, you can do the same thing with Daybreak Prison Ministry. You can get TV going into the prisons and having individuals share their stories. And when I look back over all the folks that I've shared with and I'm friends with, a lot of them became believers before they ever went to chapel. You know what I mean? They'd never been in a chapel. But one thing Brian shared with me back just 2 years ago, he passed away, and he called me on Tuesday, and he said, Royce, he said, we have to get Jesus into the cells. Thursday morning, he passed away with cancer and that stuff. And when I hear of stuff that you have written here and how your experience of meeting some of these individuals that here you had, I don't think you had the church background, but you didn't want anything to do with God. And these are people that started dropping seed in your life, that you started doing some thinking when you were on the range or in your own cell. And it took you on a journey with all these different chaplains that you've met and the conversations you've had with them to where you have come through the system and where God has taken your life. And I grabbed a line, I did not want to go back to prison.
Yeah.
When you were wondering, because you already had done time, right? So the story, you were a 19-year-old addict, drug addict. Can you share a little bit of where you've been to get there at 19 years of age and into that situation? When you were being raised as a teen or in your home?
Yeah. So, and I don't talk very much about it in the book, but it was a pretty rough, my youth was pretty rough in a number of respects. There was lots of struggles in the home. And really, for me, I remember the first time I ever got drunk, and that was horrible. I thought, I don't understand why people get drunk. But the first time I ever used was when I was about 12 years old. Maybe 11, 12 years old was the first time I ever got high. And it was really like a light bulb. It was like a switch went off in my brain. And I thought, wow, this is it. I mean, if there was ever an escape engine, this is the one, and I want it. And it just kind of took me out of that world of pain and hurt and struggle and just put me into a place of bliss. And that it literally set the stage for my teen years. I was very much involved in wanting to get drugs and doing drugs. And I grew up in Northern Ontario, and I love being outdoors. I still do. I love being out in the woods. That's my favorite place to just kind of, there's a sense of calm and peace there sometimes that's hard to describe. So, but and first time I ever got busted was, we were talking way back in the early 70s. I was 16, got busted for possession of marijuana. My goodness, today it doesn't even exist in Canada. But I was the first kid in our town, Sioux Lookout, they got busted for possession of narcotics. And oh man, they made a big deal out of that. And of course, that ostracized me in a lot of ways. Parents were telling kids not to hang out with that guy because he's bad news and all that kind of stuff. And it just led down a path of more drug use, and hit a point where I got busted. I ended up quitting school, going to work in the CN, ended up continued using, got busted 2 more times for possession, and finally decided maybe I should figure out some other place to live. Maybe I could clean up my life. I moved out to Edmonton, Alberta, and I was clean for about 3 months, but that was it. I just could not live without getting high. And the problem with getting high and is that, it's like this tunnel you go down, right? Like the stuff you're using right now is going to start to wear thin. So you look for stronger stuff and stronger stuff and stronger stuff. And for me, what ended up happening was I just got to a point where getting high was just wasn't enough. And it's one of the really dark places in my life that I share in testimony, but I don't like to, because it's very, very difficult. But I got to a point in my life where crime became a high for me. That was my high. And that set me on a really dark path, because that ended up in a murder that was pretty bad. So, that's really, sort of the path that I went down. A lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of hatred. I really, really, really hated authority. Anybody wanted to try and put any kind of rails on my life, I was pretty, didn't like that very much.
So all that stuff that was there, that would have come back from your childhood days, like as far as the pain and everything else that you're
and I didn't understand much of it then. You don't understand much of that as a young kid, right? Even as I was growing and after I became a Christian, I really didn't have a real understanding of where all that anger and bitterness and hatred was coming from, and it took a lot of years to figure that out. And I know that lots of people go into counseling and go to counseling. I didn't have that option in prison. That's where you're going to go, right? And And for me, there was a real sense of personal discovery that occurred over time, and much of my healing really took place through the Holy Spirit. That was really the centerpiece in my life. There were people that I talked with who were important to talk to, who were real mentors along the way. But it was those lonely nights in the cell where you're sitting there and you're praying and you're thinking and you're weeping and reflecting. And there are many moments in there where God's healing hand was pretty powerful in my life in different areas, and has continued to be so over the years, because there's baggage and scars you carry for life. You don't necessarily get rid of them that easily. So
yeah. So
yeah.
the crime was, you were around 19 years old when the crime was committed.
Yeah.
And was that a break and enter? Was a home invasion?
It was a break and enter. We planned to just rob the place, and there wasn't supposed to be anybody there, and there was, and that
went down.
I detail some of it in the book. It's still very difficult for me to talk about, because I just find it, it's like getting pulled back into that world and that place, and you realize who you were back then. And I was a horrible person. I really was. Amazing Grace has always been one of my favorites. A wretch like me. Well, that described what I was at that point in my life. Very much so. Yeah, I was a wretch. Yeah.
Well, from there, when you were convicted, you went to Prince Albert.
Actually, yeah. Well, I went to Edmonton, to the Edmonton Provincial Jail. It was a holding center there. So, and I was moving back and forth to court all the time, because at the times they didn't have video conferencing and all that kind of stuff. So every week I would end up going back to court, and they, because I'd been charged with not only second-degree murder, but also extortion, kidnapping. The accessory after the fact is what I ended up with on the extortion, kidnapping. But there was a whole bunch of stuff that was going on at that point in that scenario, and that's really where I started to take a good look at myself and say, there's no way I'm going to do time. I'm gonna figure out a way to end this and get it over with, because I'm not going to do any time. So, and that's where I met. The volunteer who came to see me and began to talk to me about the gospel. So, which wasn't a very good, wasn't a good conversation. No.
Would that be Greg?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I caught him. Yeah. Because the smiley, clean-cut guy that was in the room.
The guy with the way I describe it in the book is it is pristine. It's just like I always. When I read back through what I had written, I thought to myself, man, you ever capture him? Like, that's exactly, those googly glasses on, that great big smile. He just looked like one of those holy rollers. And I was just like, not the kind of guy I want to be talking to.
Yeah.
I just instinctively, I kind of knew, right? So, but yeah. So,
but what I got out of that, like, I enjoy hearing those things, for this reason. One of the last things he said to you when you were talking to him that first time, I think it was you had read the book, Hal Lindsey.
Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, Late Great
Planet
Earth,
a Christian sci-fi. But
like it was.
So you asked the Salvation Army guy, and he said, "I'll send you somebody that can relate to you."
Yeah.
Right? And this is the guy that comes in, right?
That's the guy that showed up. Yeah, I thought I couldn't understand it. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. So, but
he said
it was. Go ahead.
He said something to you as he was leaving about that Jesus Christ is the only one that can help you.
Yeah, well, that was actually after a number of encounters with him. So the first time we met, I mean, he wanted to pray with me. I said, yeah, right. I'm not praying with you. And I told him point blank, I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm sitting in a glass, a plexiglass enclosure. The officers are over there and the guys are down the range. So I'm not, there's no way, I wasn't going to pray. I didn't want to pray. I said, I don't need that stuff. He prayed. So, but he continued to come and see me. And that was what really started to not wear on me, but really began to speak to me, especially our case was very, very high profile in Edmonton at the time. This was way back in the 70s. And they just abolished the death penalty, and there were people crying for the death penalty again. These guys should hang, because I was part of a gang. And you could hear this on the media, like it was in the papers, it was on the radio, and this guy kept coming back to see me, and this really, really impacted me. I thought, like, wow, like, you're different. There's something about you that's, you're not like all them. You continue to come back and continue to want to talk. So, yeah, we must have, I don't know how many times we met, but it was over a series of a few months, and then that one fateful afternoon where he was, I guess he was just fed up with talking about nonsense, and looked me square in the eye and said, "Hank, unless you invite Jesus Christ into your life, nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to change." And that's when there was a third presence that entered the room. And I just, like that. As soon as I felt that presence, the anger and the hate just rose up in me. Like it was very powerful, the reaction. And I just looked at him and said, "Get the hell out of my life. Don't come back and see me again." And I went back down to the range, and I was just furious. The thing that's always struck me out of that story, and I don't know if I make it that clear in the book, but when the murder happened, there was a presence there, a powerful darkness that I had never experienced before, and it was like I knew I stepped over an edge, and it was like this was just the complete opposite of that, and I wanted nothing to do with that light, that kind of stuff. No, I just it really terrified me in some respects. So. Yeah, so I went back down to my cell, and I'm just, I was lost, totally and completely lost.
But the feeling you had when he said that to you, you said it just got like you felt a release of all this other stuff that was happening.
It was what happened was it was a week that I went back down to my cell, and then was probably a day or two later. One evening, I went into my cell, and I went to sleep, and I had a terrifying nightmare. Like there was no way, not even the words in paper can describe the terror that I felt, like being chased and hounded and hunted all night long, and I could feel this thing chasing me, this huge force, animal, whatever, coming at me, and I woke up in the morning, I was in a dead sweat, and I didn't even know where I was for the first few minutes. And so then I kind of, thought, well, maybe I just ate something wrong or whatever. I shoved it off. Went out, did my regular routine for the day. Went to sleep that night again, same thing. Well, and it was worse. The fear that is beyond fear, like it just gripped me as I was being hounded and chased. I could feel the jaws of this thing clamping behind me, and it just terrified me. And again, I woke up with this, just this sense of wow, like where am I? And then all of a sudden realizing I was, back in prison. And I think it was probably it was the second night. I was just about to we were just about to get locked up, and I looked down the range as I was, standing by my door. I looked down the range. The guy in the end cell looked at me, and he just smiled. And I knew I was in trouble, because at the same time that I've been going and talking to Greg about Jesus Christ, I was talking to this guy about Satanism, and he was telling me all the things that Satan could do for me in my life. And part of getting to know Satan was having these nightmares to reach the point where you were desensitized enough to actually meet Satan. And now, this may sound like all kinds of gobbledygook to people, but I can tell you something. The terror of those dreams were enough to convince me that there was something spiritual going on here that I didn't understand. I really didn't have any concept of what was going on, but I knew that there was some kind of a battle going on for me. And it was really bad. It was terrible. I had no escape. I was stuck in a prison. I had no one I could talk to. Who are you going to go and talk to about this stuff, right? Like, really, the psychologist is going to put me on medication. He's going to think I'm nuts. and I sat out in the cell, out in the range after that third night, sitting out in the range, and I was sitting on the table on these friggin' steel tables, and all this stuff was going through my head, and I thought about Greg and what he had told me, and as soon as I thought about Jesus, there was like this other presence that began to kind of float around. Again, just one of those things that's really hard to describe, and as it kind of floated around, all of a sudden I felt a sense of peace, and I thought, wow, okay, this is interesting. And I thought, well, okay, there's
you had never been to church or anything. This is something totally.
I've been to church as a kid. I've gone to church as a kid, but I never heard a thing.
Yeah,
never heard of. Like my experience in church was because my parents thought it was a good thing to go to church, but neither one of them were believers. They didn't, they just thought it was a good idea. My one experience at a church summer camp was with this counselor who was he was just a rotten person, right? Like I had no use for this. Everything I encountered in the Christian stuff just bothered me. The only good experience I had was with the pastor who I went to his house one time, and he had a family with, 8 or 10 kids in it. And I looked at this and I thought, like, wow, this looks like a happy place. This is not what I'm used to, right?
Yeah.
That was my only, other than that, I had no, this Jesus stuff and God stuff, well, whatever that was, I didn't know. I didn't care. So I really had no understanding of the spiritual dynamic at all. And then like it was as I thought about him on that range and began to reflect on that, I thought, okay, maybe I need to see Greg. Maybe I need to talk with him. And that night I went to sleep and there was no nightmare. And I woke up and I thought, whoa, okay, there's something going on here. And sure enough, Craig came back the next Sunday. He came back to see me. And that I tell the story in the book of what that experience was like, because I didn't give him a chance to say a word. I just said, look, don't say anything. I just want to let Jesus into my life. Yeah. And we sat down and prayed. That time I just shut him up. I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted to pray. I knew that this was my opportunity. How I knew, I don't know, but I did. That this, I had to do this. This was. There was no other way for me. The other side was total, complete darkness and destruction, and I could see that. Yeah.
So that's when the step. Yeah, you committed your life to Christ there.
Yeah.
And you started going to chapel services all the time.
No, there was nothing. So there was nothing at the remand. There was nothing, and like I tell people, I gave my life to Christ, and God promptly sentenced me to life in prison. That was my reward for giving my life to Christ. And off I went to Prince Albert. So and I really didn't have a lot to do with the chapel in Prince Albert. I was still trying to figure out what was going on here in this whole faith thing. I just didn't, there were lots of things that didn't make sense. It wasn't until I hit Spring Hill, Nova Scotia that I got transferred to a medium that I began getting involved in the chapel. And the real shock for me there was when I finally went to chapel, I sat down with a couple of guys who were Christians in the community, and I told them my story. And I was pretty on fire. I would talk to anybody about Jesus. It was just a part of it. And I told them my story, and they kind of looked at me like I was kind of weird. And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I better not tell my story too often. So it kind of shut me down a little bit. I went to church regularly. I took part in services and all that kind of stuff, but I kept much of my encounter with Christ to myself, because it sure seemed like people didn't quite know how to handle this story. When I told it in all the detail, they were going like, yeah, okay, you're kind of nuts, eh? But yeah.
Well, I've been to Spring Hill numerous times. You brought up something in your book. Invoked or not, God is present. That was hanging on the wall, still hanging on the wall. Yeah. And that's why when I mentioned to you about like you're going chapel regularly. Invoked or not, God is with you in the cell. God's with you on the range. Yep. It's an internal thing between you and him and a relationship happening. That's why Brian says we got to get Jesus into the cells. That's when most of your thinking inside the institutions, when the lights go out and you're in your cell, and now you got to think of all the negative stuff that's going on and how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? There's no more smiles from the guys. It's you and all the issues.
Yeah.
But you're in there the third night and you ended up having peace, and that's why you went and seen Greg the next day. And first thing I want to do is I want to give my life to Christ. Yeah. That was your decision in a cell.
Yeah.
No chapel. No chaplain.
No. And many guys that I've talked to over the years, it's been the same. It hasn't been the chapel per se. It hasn't necessarily been a chaplain per se. It's been that personal encounter that has driven them to the chapel, to see somebody, and that has begun the process. But God was already at work long before people show up in a chapel. So yeah.
So friends and family should not give up on some relative or friend who's gone to prison, because invoked or not, God is present, whether they're in their cell, and it's just God can reach them in that cell as he reached you, and he reached so many others.
Yeah. I would not be doing what I do, and I would not have done what I've done in my life. I didn't believe that. I'm firmly convinced of that. Yeah. And history tells us that. As you know, you go back and you read the stories of people over the centuries, and you find very much the same thing happening in all kinds of places in the world. So, yeah. So.
I love that. I love that. I just made a note here with Greg smiling at you, and you called him, in your mind, a holy roller, clean shaven. So he fit the category that you thought all church people might have looked like.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Then there was another guy, Jerry Fuller. And he came in as a summer chaplain at Spring Hill.
Yes. Yeah.
And you liked him. He had a good personality, but he came down on Saturday night, down on the range, when it wasn't an ideal time. It was off hours and not the chapel area. And but you had a relationship with him.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, he was. So I mean, after it was about 2 years into my sentence, a little over 2 years into my sentence, maybe a little longer than that. My father passed away, and I couldn't go to the funeral, and it was just like this cork come off the bottle. All this rage and anger that was inside me, it went off, and so I ended up back using drugs again. Started doing the same thing I'd always done. Went back to the same thing that I thought was going to solve my problems for me. So when Jerry knew I was having some struggles and issues and stuff, and he showed up in the range. Well, he showed up in the range when I was hiring a kite, and I had drugs in the cell too. On top of that, so just him being there was enough to really, really get me pretty concerned. And I basically kicked him out of my cell. I mean, I let him come in and talk to me for a few minutes, but then I kicked him out because it was very uncomfortable for me. So that again, and that whole friendship was pretty intriguing. It was very sad too, because I mean, Sherry was murdered, and that had a huge impact on me. Huge impact.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just met with Barb, actually. Barb and I Linda and I and Barb met as she was passing through to go to Nova Scotia. So we sat down, we talked.
Because she was on my mind too, because I've met her a number of times, and she was also on Huntley Street sharing her story there after this went down. And so Yeah, she came. She had, I think there was three children involved when Jerry's life was taken, and he had went to help a nephew or something in a situation, but his life was taken. Yeah, that was and she was left a young widow.
Yeah.
When the chaplain, I believe at Spring Hill, took you down for Jerry's funeral.
Yeah.
That impacted me when I read that. Where you didn't want to sit in the lower section, but you went up into the balcony for the funeral, and Barb had come in as the funeral procession begins, and she came in with the kids and sat down at the on the row down there, and that your comments that you made at that time impacted me when you saw them and knew Jerry wasn't around anymore, the impact of what a crime like that can do.
Yeah.
And whether the crime went to that extent or whether it didn't, when I realize the impact of what I've done, whether it's a neighbor, whoever, when it gets revealed inside, like it challenges our thinking, rethinking of what I've done. And the same thing with Jerry this morning. Jerry Bezanson, he said when he got out of prison, he had saved some money up in his canteen and all that, canteen money in prison. And he went back to pay back some people that he had robbed. And when they saw the change in his life, this is in his community, so he faced the individuals. He knew who he robbed. When he faced them and apologized for it and wanted to pay back, they wouldn't take anything back from him. They just glad that he got that straightened out, you know. And so when something like that happens, when the reality of whatever the crime was hits us, it changes, if you want to call it, our stinking thinking, because we're messed up when all this garbage goes down. And so that impacted me. The same when you were doing the cleaning in the Spring Hill Chapel. And Charlie and Charlotte, you were very close to them. Charlie was like a mentor to me, and Pierre Allard are still very close friends. When I go to the Montreal area to do the prisons, I stay with Judy and Pierre in their home. And so there, he was sharing the story with Charlie in a Kairos meeting at Spring Hill, and that impacted you as well, because Pierre was saying that they had been praying for his brother, who was mixed in organized crime, and his life was taken, and that affected Pierre very greatly. And him and I have talked about it a few times, but never to the depth of he would with a close friend or in a Kairos meeting where a lot of deep stuff is shared. But when I think of Charlie and Charlotte, because you were close, and I think you wrote they wanted you to come down or something to speak at his funeral, but you wrote something to you're into poem. You write a lot of poems. So,
when I'm in the mood, I write some poetry. Yeah.
So you had sent something down to be read at his funeral.
Yeah.
Charlie always stuck out to me. Like they always called him like a grandfather, you know, because I worked with him with the team from Acadia at Westmoreland and all that, and I've always appreciated him. And as a mentor, him and Charlotte in their mid-80s went to Oxford so he could study for another year. And then they came back, and he was still on the road traveling, putting conferences on with CSC and everything. That challenges me as far as trying to set a retirement thing when you are doing what you're doing, as with you in chaplaincy and what you're doing now, how God has led you through chaplaincy, and now you're training and you got your doctorate and your the writing that you're doing. And I find this book is not just a testimonial of Hank Dixon. it's full of information that volunteers going in, they need to hear what that says. The chaplains that are going in need to hear what's in that book, because it's talking about the relationship inside the institution between staff and everything, because that's the world. Whoever goes in those walls, that's their world they're living in. So when you and Linda have been married, Linda, and you were pastoring a church once you got out of the institution, and then you were struggling with, because God was speaking to you even when you were inside doing time on a life sentence. He was already speaking to you that he was going to take you on this particular journey. Like, you knew there was something stirring, and it was God-centered, like God was leading me. As you were saying, the Holy Spirit was working with you then, and he's still working with you today. Okay, that goes part and parcel when I enter into his family, right? So when you were pastoring, I think it was Dennis Vino, and you had talked to him numerous times, and he was sharing about, and he was encouraging you, maybe you should consider going back into the institutions as a chaplain, I believe, because you were struggling with that.
It was Sister Teresa Curry who did that. That was the only person on the earth who'd ever gotten away with that with me, because it's true. I don't speak a lot to that in the book. Some of it I do, but I mean, lots of people that came up to me, oh, you do really good inside a prison, and internally, inside in my heart, I just react with rage. I mean, I wanted to use some good cuss words on them and tell them, look, get out of here. Don't even talk to me about going back into a prison. I've been there. I don't like it. Bad things happen there. I don't want to go back. But it was Sister Teresa Curry that really put that, really put it out there. She had a
way of putting things out. Yeah. Sister Agnes at Renews. I worked with her for some time. Randy Fox would be on vacation. Last time I was there in 97, he had gone out for medical reasons, and he was gone for 6 months. That's when Craig Murphy came into Renews at that time. But Sister Agnes was a very laid-back individual, very gentle, and Sister Teresa was right up front. And she wasn't afraid to talk to you, whether you liked it or not.
But what's interesting, she knew how sensitive an issue that was for me. She knew that. She knew right away. Kind of broached it a little bit in the past, and I was pretty blunt with her. But this time around, when she said it to me, she said it with a whole different tone. It wasn't the Sister Teresa that I knew. This was something else. This was something far deeper. And then when she said, maybe you should consider this, that really stuck with me. It really hit. And that started the journey, the battle with God. And it was a real battle. There's no question. I just, the last place I wanted to go and minister. Lord, there's lots of other churches out here. Why can't you send me there? I don't want to go back into prison. So, and that's why I started the book the way that I did, because it's true. I did not want to go back to prison. Every fiber in my body said, this is nuts. You're crazy. You're insane. But well, how do you say no, right? So.
And how does corrections invite a guy that's a lifer, and they're inviting him to come into Renews, where there's a lot of lifers. It's our max up here in the Atlantic region. And here, this stuff started happening in CSC, where they begin to have people coming in that they weren't trained in a seminary. These are people that had done time, and they understand the prison culture. And so you coming in with your story as a chaplain in an institution that's very high maximum security, you could think like they were thinking, in the sense that what all that stuff was, whether it was PA, Spring Hill, that mindset inside. You understood that world. Then you went through, because when I'm reading your book and you're talking about this unit and that unit, when I was there, I was going back in Reduce and I was seeing these places. Okay, and so when you were talking, you mentioned about there were two major riots that went on, and the devastation that happened. Two inmates that were locked in where the fire broke out down in the segregation unit, and so the tension was extremely high. And I think Craig was with you at that time at Renews. And then you guys had to go down and do debriefing and stuff like this through the cell doors, because these a lot of them, they were in one lockdown section where they never even thought they were going to come out alive with a fire that broke out.
No, they didn't think they were going to come out alive. It's a story that I actually use that story. I speak to a justice class this last week, and the instructor in the class always gets me to tell that story because there's so many pieces of it that point out what corrections is and what happens sometimes, but also some of the pretty amazing things that do happen sometimes too. That was a pretty bad situation. So those guys, a number of them were very close to death. Had it not been for the correctional officers that went up there and rescued them out of their cells, and they did. They rescued them out of their cells. They were pulling them out of their cells. They were unconscious. They were, like they were near death from the smoke that was up there. Yeah. So it's a very powerful, the part of the story that I don't necessarily share with a university class is because, that I don't think they would always get it, right, was that one inmate who came down to the chapel. We had everybody down in the chapel doing debriefings, and we did it in 3 stages because of the amount of inmates. So psychology led the debriefing, but we did it within the chapel, and we as chaplains were invited into the debriefing because we had been part of the process of meeting and connecting with the guys. But that one guy that came in and then called me over afterwards, and he was just so excited and wanted to show me this letter that had this card that had been sent to him.
That's it.
Yeah. So and in the card it was I believe the quote is from Jeremiah, where God promises to lead him through the fire and not be harmed, and when he showed this to me, and he was just ecstatic. He's saying, like, look at this. I got this today. Like, this was 2 days after the riot, right? After, 3 days, actually.
That came from overseas, right?
It came from overseas. It had to be mailed at least 2 weeks in advance, if not 3 weeks in advance. Like, you think about this and you look at it and you go like, okay, ooh, I think God might be sending you a message, You might want to think about what he's saying to you. It was mind-blowing. And I tell that story in the book, but I don't necessarily share that with a university class because sometimes they don't quite appreciate the dynamics that are at work there. But for him, he had a huge impact on his life. And I always look at that and just think of the incredible way in which God can work and move in people's lives way beyond our understanding or expectation.
Yeah.
So, one of those amazing stories.
I remember when you first shared that, and that hit me. How God, using his person, sends this card over before the fire happened, and it arrived just around after the fire had taken place. But it comes back to, invoked or not, God is present. He was already having this person put this thing together to mail it off, and they probably never knew the circumstances that when this thing landed, where everybody was with this thing. And then, boy, that would shake anybody, whether they were the one who received that card or if they're just hearing about it. Yeah. Wow. The other thing that got me when I was reading your book, and I'm going to hold, I don't know, Phil, make sure I get this thing up right, okay? With the camera, sometimes you get it on the wrong side of your head. Can you see that? Phil? Okay, good enough. So I want the folks to know that this book written by Hank, A Lifer's Journey, Prison Chaplaincy from the Inside Out. As I mentioned earlier, this book, it will help volunteers. It will help chaplains because it's his story, but it's also a lot of practical information that a person needs when they're getting involved with prison ministry to understand the world that you're going into. It's not like your church on the street. These people are going to be needing acceptance, and they're going to be needing what you learn from here put in place, so you stand on it and walk in it, and don't turn the information away. And I'll just leave it. That's really not anything to do. It's a correctional institution that you're in, and Hank is giving you information to help you work inside an institution. So I encourage you, it's on Amazon. Get a copy of it. There's so much more in here to read. And if you're watching the program, then the gentleman that's here is the one who wrote this story. And there's so much more in here that you got to get it, okay? One thing, about a week ago, I had a sheriff come in. And again, Hank, when I mentioned at the beginning, I'm trying to get information to the fellas when I'm inside visiting them one-on-one or in a chapel service. And I'm trying to get people on the street, their families, to understand where their relative is, whether male or female. They go through the issues in female institutions. And to help the church people understand the prison setting of where people live and the amount of the drugs and everything else that's inside the institution. As you were saying, when Jerry came down to your cell, I mean, you still had access to all this stuff, although it was inside the prison as much as what you get on the street, right?
Still there. It's no different today than it is than it was before. I mean, So
if you ever take it out, you're going to have a riot like you've never seen before.
Yeah, there are dry points, but most of the time there's stuff around. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's more lethal today than it was then because of some of the stuff that's moving into the institution. So that's.
So these are two sheriffs that I knew, and they would transport people from the courthouse in Halifax to whatever institution they were being moved to, or if they were going federal, they'd go into Spring Hill in the reception area there till they find out what institution they're going to send the folks. If someone was new going into prison, they are really nervous of what will take place coming into a setting like that. And so these guys were Christian guys, and they would share their faith. And it's not that they weren't preaching, but they weren't cursing and swearing like a lot of people would do. They were very calm and encouraging to these individuals that they were moving. Then they hooked up with us. We do an annual grocery box drive in the area. We're up in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and all that. These two guys joined us to deliver grocery boxes. Now, corrections, the chaplains, parole, probation people, they send us a form with the people's names, ex-offender, children, so we have wrap gifts for the kids. It takes 2 men to carry the box of groceries. These guys that are sheriffs, they were delivering some boxes for us and taking them to the door just before Christmas. And some of the guys that were opening the door, one of the sheriffs, you can't miss him. You know this guy. And so they would bring the boxes in, and the ex-offender would be overwhelmed by the gifts for the kids and the amount of groceries coming in, because it's a hard time for people coming out that don't have any jobs, that can't find work, and they got all this Christmas special stuff that's happening. And when the guys bring it in, again, there's no Bible thumping, nothing like that. They just share the love of Christ and wish them a Merry Christmas and that. Do you mind if we pray with you? And no, not at all. So, I mean, for what? And so it's not And it's just asking God's blessing on their home and with the kids when they're having Christmas. The reason I bring that up is because you had an incident with an individual who arrested you at the time, Brian Scott. That story hit me hard. It reminded me of, we think a lot of times that the police or the officers are all this here, like a lot of negative. There's some there. I mean, that they got their issues that they're working on, and then they're under a lot of stress with the job site that they're on. But this Brian guy arrested you after the crime, and you said he had a 38 to the back of your neck here.
Yeah, right in the back of my neck. Yeah.
This was your first encounter, right?
That was my first encounter, yeah.
Yeah. So the amazing thing is, it's like invoked or not, God is present, because that's all he said was, Edmonton to police, you're under arrest, right? And he took you in. Now, he later became the chief of police for the city of Edmonton.
For Brandon. He became the head of the major crimes unit in Edmonton, and then moved on to the city of Brandon City Police. He became chief of police in Brandon, Manitoba.
Oh, Brandon. Okay, so this was when he was in Edmonton. But the thing, inmates and police don't go together, right? Like it's not the connection.
No, there's no connection there. Yeah. So.
None. So this guy, with no one knowing, was following you through the system.
Yeah.
And his wife was Marilyn. Marilyn, his wife, every year would write. He would contact your mom as well, seeing how things were going. You didn't even know that was going on. And so then you're out of prison, and you turn around, and you and Linda go to Vancouver Island. And while you were there, Brian had moved out there with Marilyn, and you went to the hospital because he was in the hospital, and he had cancer. This guy, that was the first time you've seen him since the night he had the .38 revolver to the back of your neck. 32 years.
Well, yeah, so it was about 30 years. We after my arrest, we had made some connections. And they weren't long connections. They were just, because I was involved in a lot of stuff there. So they were doing a lot of talking to me. Or trying to get me to talk anyway. Then there were different departments. There was the RCMP were involved in investigations. The city police were involved in investigations, and I can go into all kinds of detail, but it would take us for a long time. But fundamentally, there was something about Brian that was different, and I couldn't pin it down. There was something about him. He treated me different than other cops did, and especially when I was dealing with other department or the other force, so to speak. Yeah, it was totally different. But there was a humanity in the way that he dealt with me, and I never really encountered much of that. And he planted a seed there that God, really began to use years later. But he stayed connected with my family because and then when we got on the street, Linda and I would exchange Christmas cards every year. We kept our distance because cops and ex-cons don't connect. And it wasn't until it was 30 years later that we finally connected. And I was actually with Gordon Green when I connected with him. We made a point of we were at a conference out in BC, and Gordon and I Gordon knew nothing about my story about him. I had to tell Gordon about this. He was I think he was a little pie-eyed there when I told him. So just trust me on that. So we went over to Vancouver Island to see him, both him and Marilyn. That was the first time that I had seen him since 1977 would have been the last time I saw him. We got to know, got to connect and know each other a little bit. And that started the process of Linda and I going over to see them the next year. And in that process, he became he became ill, was diagnosed with cancer. So when Linda and I went to Vancouver Island, we arranged our plans, our daily plan of seeing the island, so that we would end up back at the hospital to meet with him, to be there for an hour or so every day that we were there on the island. And that's when Marilyn approached Linda. That's still a very
Yeah. So that's
a little bit emotional still.
Hey,
Sorry.
I got emotional when I read it. I kid you not. I kid you not.
So,
that is such a powerful, powerful story, because Brian wanted you to speak at his funeral.
Well, Marilyn was the one that came to us and said, look, she went to Linda first because she was afraid to come to me because she didn't know how I'd react to this. She went to Linda and I said, Linda, can Hank do the funeral? We've discussed it with the entire family. He has 5 kids and they have spouses, etc. And everybody agreed that they wanted me to do the funeral because he was dying. We knew that. And I was stunned. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that when Linda approached me. I just wow. Okay. I don't know if I'm appropriate to do this, but I mean, I can't say no. So, and 6 weeks later, we left the island and had no idea when he was going to pass away. 6 weeks later, he passed away. Yeah. And I got the call.
That's 2009. And then the family, it was like, I think it was in the book, it was like you had become like an extended member of their family. The whole family knew about you all these years. You never had any contact with them.
I had no contact with any of them, but they knew about me. They knew about that what my path in life had been. They knew all about that. They were getting dates on me, and that it was mind blowing. I'd never thought in a million years. So it was very emotional for me to be there in that place. It was
2017, you returned to do Marilyn's funeral.
Yes, Marilyn passed away, and the family called and said, "Please come and do her funeral." So I did.
That is so powerful, sir. Yeah, that's a God thing.
I don't know of anybody else that's done it or that's happened to. And as a matter of fact, you know what? That story may never have ended up in the book because for me, it was very, very personal. It's hard to describe. It's what? There are those things that happen in life that you just want to keep. Right? Because people are going to maybe misunderstand it or not appreciate the power of it. And then I finally sat down at the monitor or typed and began writing it out. And I shared it with a couple of people, and they were just like, why would you not put this in a book? And I thought, well, okay, maybe I will. But anyway, it's pretty deep. And I think that's the piece of this puzzle that maybe, and I talk about this somewhat in the book, but if it hadn't been for Brian, I'd have never been able to function in a federal prison. I had a real distaste for authority. I mean, I really hated it. And he was the one who put a completely different face on it, who opened the door for me to see behind the uniforms, to see the people, to understand that world in a way that I'd never understood or even was willing to understand. And so to me, it was just really one of the pivotal moments in my life in terms of, and I talk about that moment in the book at Renous when after the riot, when I really came face to face with that reality of how I needed to function as a chaplain. It's still very powerful to me. So, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, it moved me because that's something that's not that you don't see or you don't hear of. It's so. Anyway, sir, now I'm starting to get emotional here. So that's.
Oh, here, Rick. I'll get you even more emotional here in a minute, Harry. Hey, show you something here?
I got my own here. Oh, what's this?
There you go. See that?
Yeah.
This is the box that Brian used to keep all his cufflinks and pins and everything in. Okay, it's a, I forget what it's made out of. But anyway, it's some kind of stone. It's got eagles carved on it. He loved eagles. And this was a gift from the family.
Wow.
So
that's a good keepsake.
I keep it in my desk up here. So, yeah.
So that is something, that's a special treasure.
Yeah.
That whole incident, that whole family thing there, that's a special treasure.
Yeah.
It's not normal. Yeah. You mentioned with your background when you left corrections as a chaplain, you were at the end of your time with Corrections Canada and the private group that took over chaplaincy from Corrections Canada, but you were training chaplains to give them proper training. And if a person who knows the culture after having lived in it for so long and seen so much stuff, you can share a lot of information to people that are training. And one of the things you said is you got to know when it's time to leave. And you said you took your hats off. You took your hat off to this one guy because as a chaplain, he was hired and he walked in that day and resigned that day.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that's knowing when you gotta go. But he knew this is not the place. You know?
This is not my calling. It's not my place. No. So,
he had a revelation there. But then you worked on your doctorate degree.
Yep.
And when you went to the institute, did you had to finish your grade 12, like your GED? Or
I when I entered prison, I had a grade 10 education, and I barely made it through grade 10. I mean, I actually made it through grade 10 might be a bit of a stretch. I think they just passed me in grade 10.
Okay.
I didn't have much, I didn't study, wasn't interested in it, nothing. I didn't want anything to do with that stuff. I went to high school because I was supposed to, but that was it. And then quit in grade 10. Or the end of grade 10. So when I got to prison, I tried to do a little bit of upgrading and stuff. That didn't go that well. Didn't enjoy that much. But that changed entirely when I felt this call to go into ministry, because then I began to realize, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to up the game here and see if I can actually do the work. And it was a bit of a surprise to me to discover that I did have an aptitude for learning. There was actually some capacity there to learn. So that's what I did. I started doing some upgrading, got my GED, and then went on to do 2 university courses in prison. And then when I got out into the street, began working on my Bachelor of Arts degree, and then went on to do a Master of Divinity degree, and got ordained and all that stuff, and then later on in life, I went on to do my doctor of ministry degree. Yeah. So.
So, and now you're out of chaplaincy in the sense, I mean, you still talk about it because it's been such a long part of your life. That's where you're trained, and that's years that you've had.
Yeah.
But now you're teaching at a university right there in Winnipeg.
Yeah, Providence Theological Seminary. I teach the intro chaplaincy course, and I'm teaching the prison chaplaincy course this fall. This is a new course for them. I've taught prison chaplaincy courses in the past for Booth University College, the Salvation Army College here. But this one is for Providence, and it's a new course, and I'm redesigning a bunch of things in it, so I'll be doing that this fall, and then we'll continue to do that for a little bit. I do some preaching too, but all of that keeps me pretty busy right now. So.
And motorcycle riding?
And motorcycle riding, yeah. I love to motorcycle. I love to ride.
Summer's here.
Summer's here. So I've already been on a trip down to Southern Ontario and back, and so may take another trip yet this year. We'll see how time permits. And
good stuff. Man, it was good to see you today, and the sharing right from the beginning to where we're at right now.
Good.
It's a lifer's journey, and it's a powerful one.
Yeah.
been an honor to know you and to work with you and to be in conferences with you, and I appreciate what God has done in your life.
Thanks, Royce. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. And when I asked some questions as far as like your commitment to Christ and with this Greg guy and everything else, I guess what I like about the story is what Brian Judge had said, like this was no chaplain with you. This was nobody else. This was just you and God in your cell or on the range or wherever you were, the Holy Spirit just working with you and drawing you closer into where you're supposed to be going.
Yeah.
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 Love you, sir.
You too. Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
God bless.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Only Jesus, only Jesus, only Jesus can set the captive free. Break the chains of sin that bind, free the soul and free the mind. Only Jesus can set the captive free.